I'm photographer David duChemin, and this is Vision is Better, a sometimes weekly podcast about the craft and art of photography. Welcome here. Hey, welcome to another episode of Vision is Better. This is episode 34. It's long overdue. I apologize for the absence. I was in Kenya, India, and Istanbul, and if there's one thing I've learned over the last few weeks, it's that I suck at creative multitasking. Doing a couple things at once was really challenging for me, and I decided rather than do a half-baked video for you while I was on the road, I would come home and do a half-baked video for you. So today I want to talk through a photograph I made in Rajasthan, India. I think there's some teachable moments in it, and it'll give me a chance to get an episode out to you while I clear my jet lag and get something to you next week that's a little more substantive. So let's take a look at this photograph. First of all, I walked into this temple every single morning for a week and photographed there. And this was actually one of the very last photographs that I made in the entire time that I was in Rajasthan. And I was there with some students, and one of them who's become a good friend of mine, his name was Don. We were walking into this temple together, and I remember sort of saying to him that inside, internally, I was kind of rolling my eyes because I really didn't want to go into this temple yet again. I made the assumption that because I had been there a number of times, that it was a little bit going to be sort of same old, that I'd been here and what could this place possibly show me that was new, that I hadn't photographed over the last 5 days. And I find myself saying this a lot, at least internally. I find myself kind of battling this because we make assumptions about what is going to show up. And I tell everyone that will listen to me that I think photographs are made up of line, light, and moments. And the lines in a photograph like this change every day because of the circumstances that are there. The lines in this photograph, yes, in part are due to the architecture, which doesn't change, and these great lines and the columns and stuff. But this gentleman showed up that day, and I hadn't seen him before, so he brought new lines to the photograph. The light, of course, changes through the day, and this kind of photograph could only be photographed at this particular time of day. And then, of course, the moment that shows up with a guy like this. And so I was kind of rolling my eyes and thinking, what am I going to see that's new? And I was taking my shoes off at the door. And as I walked across this temple courtyard, this gentleman came up who had been speaking to Don previously and introduced himself and said, would you like to hear me play my flute? And to which, of course, I gave an enthusiastic, there's nothing more that I would like to hear right now than your flute. And internally, I'm thinking the last thing in the world I want is to hear this guy's flute, because I got photographs to make, man. I've got to go and find my moment. And internally, this happens to me a lot. And the reason I keep talking about internally is because I think the internal struggle of making a photograph is the most significant one, and is the hardest to overcome. So of course I said yes, and he pulled out his flute, and it was this kind of crappy PVC flute, but he made some beautiful music with it. And as he's photographing it, it occurs to me, because clearly I learned the hard way and the long way, that this is my moment. And by pulling out the flute, he's introducing some new lines. And so as soon as he was finished, because I was actually standing where he is now in this photograph, and I said, that was really lovely, and which it truly was. I said, would you mind if I made your photograph, sir? And of course, he was very happy to do so, and I just turned around, sort of forced him backwards a little bit, and he picked up his flute and started playing. And that's the most amount of kind of manipulation of the scene that I did. I didn't particularly pose him. I just kind of pushed him and asked him to stand there and play his flute. And it was then moving the camera around. I'm using a Fuji X-T1 in this photograph with a 10 to 24 millimeter lens, which is roughly a 16 to 35 equivalent on a 35 millimeter frame, which is to say it's an ultra wide lens. And the X-T1 also has a flip down LCD screen, which I've come to rely on a lot because I love to be able to change my POV. So it's this ultra wide lens, and the lower POV allows me to get this great triangle of the architecture, this triangle of sky. Without that sky, I wouldn't be able to get a silhouette. So to get nice and low on him, I can still keep some architectural details like this bit in the background, this little tiny cat sitting on the wall. And these columns take on much greater dynamism when I bring the camera low and photograph up. So the camera's down sort of at my waist, and I'm photographing up at this gentleman, and I'm just kind of moving the camera around to get as much separation as I can between him and this column. And there were some frames that I had where he was his head, I was too low and his head was touching, at least spatially touching the top here. Somewhere I was a little bit more over here, and there was not enough separation between the column. And so you just kind of keep moving. And in my case, and I have some images where there's a starburst and some where there's not. As many of you know, I kind of like this starburst. I think it adds mood, and because I wear glasses, I do see the world this way. I see a lot of kind of starbursty, specular stuff, and I like it. So waiting for moments where his fingers were up rather than down gave me a little bit more interest and a nicer outline for the silhouette, and also I think gives a little bit of a better visual cue as to what this photograph actually is. I think when you're in silhouette, sometimes you run the risk of losing those visual cues, and you have to watch for the shapes. Silhouettes are all about shapes. The starburst is accomplished by a much tighter aperture than some would normally shoot at. In this case, it was f13. I kind of go between f13 and f20 or so in order to get that sharp starburst. And I like the flare, as long as it's not on his face. I have some versions of this where the flare kind of hits his face. It's not quite as nice, but here I don't mind the flare. I love the fact that the light is shining through the bag here, and there's enough detail in the shadows that I can see his vest, but not being so much that I start concentrating on the look on his face. For me, it's all about the shape. The other thing that makes this photograph what it is I photographed this using the Fuji Velvia emulation. So it has built into it has a number of film emulations, and one of my favorites is the Fuji Velvia, which punches the shadows, makes them really kind of dark, and gives me a nice solid silhouette. Great sort of positive film colors to the photograph, and this real nice warmth. The other thing I want to say is I think a lot of the time we're photographing this kind of thing and we get sucked into this, this religion of histograms where we truly believe that we have to make sure that we don't lose any detail. And some of the images that I took over this week had a histogram that spiked pretty heavily over on this side. Now in this image I've pulled it back in the tone curve, but looking in camera you would see a huge spike over on this side saying, oh my gosh, your highlights are blown out. And I just want to remind you that it's okay that highlights are blown out. It's okay that there's no detail here. In fact, it's okay that there's no detail in the shadows. What's important is asking yourself which details. And my advice is, don't think about which metering mode you're using. Don't even really think about the histogram in the sense of, am I losing details on the left or the right? Think about what is important in the photograph. These photographs can only take so much dynamic range, and the question is, do you want detail everywhere? I photographed leopards a couple weeks ago in Kenya, and the sky is completely blown out, and people were wrestling with how to expose for this. And I kept saying, look, what's important is the leopard, so expose for the leopard, and don't worry if the sky is blown out. It was a featureless sky anyway, so you would go to all that trouble to get the histogram on the right hand side not peaking, not losing detail, and then when you looked at the photograph you will not have got the detail in the leopard, and you will have perfectly exposed a bland featureless sky. So know what you're trying to expose for. Ask yourself as you're photographing, am I shooting for the look of this, or am I adhering a little too tightly to the histogram religion? The histogram is helpful, but it's only a tool, and if you understand that the best digital negative is the one with the most amount of data. You'll push that file to the right on the histogram. You'll make sure you get lots of data over here. But at the same time, you'll see my histogram's heavily weighted on the right, in part because it's a silhouetted scene and I don't need all this detail. I'm not going to do a lot. This is a JPEG image straight out of my camera that I didn't do much to. Of course I have a RAW file as well, but I haven't yet developed it. But this photograph as a JPEG works perfectly well and will print beautifully, and I'm not going to do a lot of manipulation, so I don't need a super robust histogram here. Perfect timing. So time to calibrate your monitors, people. Anyway, that's episode 34 of Vision is Better. Thanks so much for joining me. We'll see you next time. Remember, gear is good, but vision's better.